Picture this. London, Westminster Abbey, West Entrance. It is 1998, and above the great medieval door, 10 stone figures stand in niches that had been empty for centuries. The Church of England had finally filled them, not with medieval bishops, not with kings, but with 10 Christians from the 20th century who had died for their faith. Most visitors walk underneath these 10 without knowing their names. One of them is a man most people have never heard of. He stands in stone above one of the most famous Christian buildings on earth, alongside Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, and Jean-Denis Louvum, the only Miao mountain pastor in that company of witnesses. The government that killed him paid his family approximately $250 as compensation. But before Westminster Abbey, before the stone, before the compensation, there was a sports ground in a small mountain county in southwest China, December 29th, 1973. Thousands had been ordered to attend, filling the square until there was no room to move. Armed guards stood at the perimeter. A paper hat had been placed on an old man's head, a death hat, his government called it, with his name crossed out in red ink and 5 crimes written on the back. He had spent 4 years in prison. His wife had spent 3 years in prison. One of his sons had died in prison. According to family accounts preserved by the Miao Church, before the trial began, the authorities had silenced him. Some say his tongue had been cut, others that he had been beaten so severely he could not speak. What the accounts agree on is this: when they brought him before the crowd, he could not speak. Former members of his own congregation had been brought forward to testify against him, one by one. He stood on that platform before thousands of witnesses and gave no response. He couldn't. They had taken his voice. All he had left was his face, and his face was smiling. His name was Wang Zhiming, a Miao mountain pastor from Wuding County, Yunnan Province, in the mountains of southwest China. His name means brilliant light, and the smile on his face the morning they killed him was not a miracle produced in that moment. It was the output of 66 years, a life spent building something so full of God that in the end, there was simply no room left for fear. Comment below with, "I believe in Jesus if following Christ is costing you something right now." Stay to the end, where we reveal the hidden disciplines that enabled an ordinary mountain pastor to walk to his own execution, smiling, which will enable you to run with endurance the race set before you. The Miao are one of China's minority peoples, driven for centuries into the mountain badlands of the south by pressure from the Han majority. By the late 19th century, the Miao of Yunnan lived on the edge. Animists, spirit worshippers, bound to traditions that cost them everything. Hopelessness, one missionary wrote, was their way of life. In 1906, the year before Wang Zhiming was born, 2 men walked into the Miao villages of Yunnan for the first time: Arthur Nichols of the China Inland Mission and Samuel Pollard of the United Methodist Mission. They arrived from different sending bodies, united by the same calling. They were tall, fair-haired, big-nosed, nothing the Miao had ever seen. When they arrived, Wuding County was being devastated by bubonic plague and typhus. The missionaries did not run. They taught hygiene, clean water, sanitation, and they preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pollard developed a written script for the Miao language, so that the people could read scripture for themselves in their own tongue for the first time in history. Within a year, over 1,400 Miao were baptized. 20 years later, there were 20,000 Christians. By the 1950s, over 100,000. A people who had been described as hopeless had become, in a generation, one of the great revival stories of the 20th century. Wang Zhiming was born in 1907, the year after Nichols and Pollard arrived. His parents' names are not preserved in any surviving account. His birth order is not recorded. In 1921, at age 14, he began attending a local school. 3 years later, His family enrolled him in the CIM school at Sapushan, the church school built on the hilltop where Pollard had planted the first congregation. He graduated in 1926. It was there, at Sapushan, that Wang Zhiming became a Christian. After graduation, the missionaries assigned him to teach at a school in Xiangyun County. He was not a student who had merely passed through. He was someone they trusted with their work. He taught for years, preaching in surrounding villages. In 1935, he returned to Sapushan, teaching and preaching both. In 1937, the congregation recognized him as their pastor. He had no formal ordination papers, only the trust of those he served. It would be 14 more years before a senior pastor traveled to Kunming to formalize what the church already knew. Wang Zhiming was their shepherd. His formal ordination came in 1951, at the age of 44. He married. They had 3 sons. Her name is rarely highlighted in the accounts that have reached us. Yet her suffering was equal to his, and her faithfulness through 3 years of imprisonment and her son's decades of hardship is part of the same story. What is preserved is what together they built. By 1944, Wang Zhiming was elected president of the General Assembly, his pastoral territory covering 5 counties: Wuding, Luquan, Fumin, Lufeng, and Yuanmo. He preached, trained elders, organized. In the mid-1940s, he compiled and translated the Miao hymn book, Hymns of Praise to the Lord, the first Miao Christian hymn book in China. He gave his people not just faith, but a voice for it, in their own language, in their own melody. By 1949, there were approximately 5,500 Miao, Yi, and Lisu Christians in his area. Then everything changed. In 1949, the Communist Party took control of China. Foreign missionaries were expelled. Spiritual opium, the government declared. Church properties were confiscated. Wang Zhiming was ordered to return home and farm under revolutionary supervision. He obeyed the farming order. The Bible instructed submission to governing authorities, and he submitted. But there was a line. The communist land reform campaigns had led to landlords being publicly beaten, humiliated, executed. Wang Zhiming was expected to participate. He refused. To his sons, he said, "I don't know what's happening. Those kind-hearted people leased their lands to us. They didn't even charge us much money. It was very generous of them to do that. But now they are getting all this brutal treatment." Not theological language. Plain moral language. A man who remembered kindness and refused to pretend it had not happened. As the government pushed Christians to attend denunciation meetings, to publicly condemn former missionaries and enemies of the state, Wang Zhiming refused again. His refusal produced the sentence that would define him. "My hands have baptized many converts," he said, "and should not be used for sinfulness." 8 words. They told the government exactly who he was, a man who knew what his hands were for and would not be redirected. In the early 1950s, Wang Zhiming was one of 6 Miao Christian leaders who signed the 3 Self-Patriotic Movement Manifesto, self-governing, self-propagating, self-supporting, after a communist political education session and a visit to Beijing. In one sense, it was an affirmation of indigenous Chinese Christianity. In another, it was accommodation with communist oversight. Wang signed it. But drawing that line did not move his other lines. In 1954, he was arrested on the charge of refusing to mend his ways and continuing to engage in religious and spying activities. Released, the government needed him alive as propaganda. Given a public post as the Miao representative to the Political Consultative Conference. He even met Chairman Mao in Beijing. The government thought it had co-opted him. Wang Zhiming continued to teach, pray, and lead underground worship. Both sides understood what the arrangement really was. In 1964, he was removed from office in the 4 Cleanups campaign and sent back to farming. He lived in relative peace for 2 years, always leading the underground congregation that gathered around him. Then, in 1966, Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution. the revolutionary masses came to the Wang family home. They ransacked the house and beat everyone inside. They tied the family together and paraded them from village to village. Wang Zhiming was forced to wear a dunce cap stamped with the words spy and lackey of the imperialists. At public condemnation meetings attended by thousands, the family was the target of fists and spit. The spit, his son would later write, was almost enough to drown us. And yet, Wang Zhiming never stopped pastoring. When the revolutionary rebels eventually turned on each other and left the family a season of respite, he intensified the underground work, gathering believers in mountain caves, leading worship in secret, baptizing converts in the dark. There was a man in his congregation whose name became a wound in the Miao church's memory, Elder Long. He had once been a preacher, a man who had stood in these same villages and proclaimed the gospel. But Elder Long, whether by conviction or by fear the record does not say, joined the Red Guards, renounced his faith, became an atheist. His intimate knowledge of the church, who the leaders were, where they met, what they believed, made him the most dangerous possible persecutor. It was Elder Long who fanned the flame that led to Wang Zhiming's arrest. On the night of May 10, 1969, Wang Zhiming had been in the mountains performing baptisms. Someone informed. The next morning, May 11th, he was arrested along with 20 other church leaders. His wife was arrested. His sons were arrested. He was 62 years old. "I do not want to tell you how it happened," his son wrote years later. "It is too horrific to repeat." His wife spent 3 years in prison. 2 of his sons spent 9 years in prison. 1 of his sons died in prison. Wang Zhiming himself was held for 4 years. And the family was never permitted to see him during the entire time. They could drop off clothes at the detention center, not food. They received no information about his physical condition. When the family came to the detention center, the soldiers mocked them. "Your old man was a bad guy. He believed in God. Why don't you draw a clear line with him? Do you believe in God or in Chairman Mao and the Communist Party?" Inside, Wang Zhiming was asked his version of the same question. Every interrogation, every beating that followed the answer. "Do you trust Mao Zedong or Jesus?" "I believe in Jesus." "Do you trust Mao Zedong or Jesus?" "I believe in Jesus." 4 years. The answer never changed. Whatever it cost, his body, his health, his freedom, his family's freedom, the answer did not change. But what you have not yet seen is what the government had planned to do with this death. Because they had not organized just an execution. They had organized a demonstration with thousands of witnesses, proof that there was no God who could protect the Miao Church, no faith worth holding to, and Wang Zhiming's death would be the final word. They had arranged former members of his own congregation to testify against him, and they had silenced him so he could not answer, and they had the full weight of the communist state behind them. And it would have worked, except for what happened on his face. Before we follow Wang Zhiming to the execution ground, a quick word. This story took weeks of research to uncover, work our members make possible. If you would love to be part of this community that ensures these hidden legacies are told, and told well, hit the join button on the channel homepage. You will not just be a member, you will be standing in the same spirit as the witnesses themselves, and encouraging many others to run with endurance the race God has set before them. On December 28, 1973, the day before his execution, the family was permitted to see him. A dozen family members gathered at the detention center. What they saw broke his son's heart. His hair had turned completely gray. He was thin like a skeleton. Each time he moved, the shackles around his ankles clanked loudly as he hobbled toward them. They all wept. A guard barked, "Stop crying. Hurry up and talk to your father one by one. Time is limited." He ordered them to speak Mandarin, so he could monitor every word exchanged. Family accounts record that Wang Zhiming was brought 6 boiled eggs for the visit. He kept 3 and returned 3, saying nothing. The number needed no explanation for those who had sat under his teaching, the Trinity and the resurrection. In the last exchange permitted to him, he chose symbols over speech and entrusted everything to those who could read them. He took his wife's face in his hands hands that had been injured in the years of imprisonment, still bearing wounds, and made the sign of the cross on her forehead. The pastor making his last pastoral act, blessing the one who had stood alongside him, who had served 3 years in prison, who would face the days ahead without him. The hands that had baptized many converts used one final time for what they were made for. Wang Zhiming had spoken in code with his family for years, communist-sounding language that meant Christian things. He used it now. "I haven't been able to reform my thinking," he said, in the level voice of a minister. "Since I cannot be changed, I am responsible and deserve what I receive. But for all of you, don't follow me. Listen to what the above tells you." In the China of 1973, the above, Shangmian, meant one thing: the party, the government, the authorities who ruled from above. He was telling his son, stay alive, appear compliant, survive. His son, weeping, replied, "Dad, we will listen to what the above tells us, but we have many children at home who need you. If you can't be reformed and come back home, what will the children do?" What the son meant, encoded carefully, clearly, was, "You are our pastor. The flock needs a shepherd." Wang Zhiming indicated they must trust God. He will provide. The next morning was the public trial. The family was permitted to attend, but not to watch. They had to squat on the ground with their hands clutching their heads. The charges were read, 5 fabricated crimes. The death hat was placed on his head, his name crossed out in red, and he was raised on the platform for all to see. Former members of his congregation came forward, one by one, to testify against him. Wang Zhiming gave no response. He couldn't. His voice had been taken. The sentence was announced. He has been sentenced to death. The sentence will be carried out immediately. Government supporters roared, "Long live Chairman Mao, down with the counter-revolutionary." His son stole glances from his crouch on the ground. And what he saw, on his father's face, in that moment, with the death hat on and the shackles on and thousands of witnesses screaming, was a smile. Not the smile of a man who did not understand what was happening. The smile of a man at complete peace, who knew exactly where he was going. The women of the congregation saw it too. They rushed toward the platform where Elder Long stood. "Dire Satan!" they cried. "You previously preached the gospel. Now you are committing a heinous crime. Dare you come down?" The crowd that had been ordered to stand in organized silence broke into chaos. Wang Zhiming was loaded onto a truck and paraded through the streets of Wuding County for half an hour. Then he was taken to an old airport at the edge of town and shot by a firing squad. He was 66 years old. The family begged for the body. The soldiers refused at first. They prayed. They pleaded. Finally, the soldiers relented. They brought Wang Zhiming home in a cart. It was too dark to bury him that night. The house was placed under guard, but the guards fell asleep, and between 70 and 80 members of the Miao church came quietly through the dark to pray with the family. No announcement, no procession, just 70 people moving past sleeping soldiers in the night to keep vigil with the dead. The next day, they buried him in an unmarked grave, praying and singing as quietly as possible, while many of the congregation watched from hiding places in the hills. When the body came home, those who saw his face said the same thing. He looked peaceful, as if he were simply taking a nap. At the time of Wang Zhiming's arrest in 1969, there were 2,795 Christians in Wuding County. By 1980, 11 years after his arrest, there were 12,000. Today, the Miao Church in Wuding counts tens of thousands of believers. Some accounts say 30,000, others more, and more than 100 places of worship. 2 of Wang Zhiming's surviving sons went on to become pastors. The grain of wheat that fell into the ground bore fruit in his own bloodline. The government that had staged a mass demonstration to end the Miao Church had instead ignited it. Every person who watched an old man smile walking to his death carried something home with them that could not be uncarried. In the late 1970s, as the Cultural Revolution receded, China began cautiously relaxing some of its strictest religious controls, and the Miao church, which had been meeting in secret for years, began to breathe again. Wang Zhiming's son, who had himself been arrested and imprisoned in 1976, was appointed as the Miao representative to the Wuding County People's Congress. He tried to refuse by presenting his father's history and his own. The official went red in the face. "They did a sloppy job. I'll look into this." Days later, the son received a document clearing all charges. His father's verdict was officially reversed. Now the family could build a tomb. The memorial service drew an enormous gathering. The choir alone numbered 2,000 voices. On the tomb they inscribed, "They will rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." They could not write the full verse openly. Fear of the party still pressed, but every person present knew what it said. In the mid-1990s, the government issued a formal rehabilitation, and a commemorative tablet was erected at Wuding County. The local Miao church, with permission, carved the inscription, "Wang Zhiming was unjustly arrested on May 11, 1969. Fabricated evidence led to his conviction, and he was martyred in Wuding on December 29, 1973. He died at the age of 66. As Scripture says of the saints, "They will rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." The only known monument in China to a Christian martyr of the Cultural Revolution, inscribed by the community that had watched him die, with a word the government had finally permitted. In 1998, Wang Zhiming's stone figure was unveiled above the west door of Westminster Abbey. He stands there alongside Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, and Janani Lu Wum, the only Miao mountain pastor in that company of witnesses. When descendants of Wang Zhiming traveled to see it and brought photographs back to the Miao villages, the villagers wept. The man they had watched die, shackled, silenced, smiling, was standing in stone above one of the great churches of the world. The grain of wheat falls into the ground, and it does not remain alone. It never does, when the one who plants it believed. And here is what built the smile. Wang Zhiming did not walk to his execution as a man who had decided to be brave in that moment. He walked there as a man who had been practicing one thing his entire life, and the execution was simply the final exam in a course he had been running for 66 years. The first discipline was formation before the test. He spent decades being formed before he was ever tested publicly, 14 years before he entered the school at Sapushan, then years of teaching before he led. The answer he gave under 4 years of interrogation was not produced by the interrogation. It was produced by 40 years of quiet formation in scripture and prayer, in the daily practice of saying what he believed to people who needed to hear it. You do not find your answer in the moment of the test. You bring it in. The second discipline was refusing the smaller compromise. He signed the 3 Self-Manifesto. That was an accommodation. He refused the denunciation meetings. That was the line. The discipline is not refusing everything. It is knowing which concession you can live with and which one will cost you your soul, and holding that distinction in ordinary time when no one is watching and no one will know the difference. The third discipline was shepherding in secret when the public path is closed. When the church was driven underground, Wang Zhiming did not retire. He gathered people in mountain caves. He baptized converts in the dark. He preached in fields and houses and wherever someone would listen. The closed door is not the rescinded call. The form of the ministry changes. The call does not. The fourth discipline was giving the same answer 10,000 times. The interrogators asked the same question every day for 4 years. He gave the same answer every time. I believe in Jesus. The discipline of a life of faith is not the heroic, single moment of declaration. It is the 1,000 ordinary repetitions at cost, with no audience, when you could have said something else, and no one would have blamed you. The fifth discipline was holding the theology of the grain of wheat. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. Wang Zhiming did not see the tens of thousands of Christians in Wuding County. He did not see his stone figure at Westminster Abbey. He did not see the choir of 2,000 at his memorial. He did not see his sons become pastors. His job was to fall. The harvest was not his to manage, only his to trust. That is the story of Wang Zhiming. The government of the People's Republic of China, the same government that organized his execution, that paid his family $250 as compensation, was eventually compelled to put his name on a stone and write the word unjustly. They could kill the man. They could not kill what he had planted. Comment below with, "I believe in Jesus." If this story is calling you to something, not because saying it here costs you anything close to what it cost him, but because those same 4 words are available to you today, in whatever ordinary moment you are living through, and saying them when it costs something small is the practice that makes it possible to say them when it costs something large. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, like and subscribe to Cloud of Witnesses for more life-changing stories of faith that will equip you to boldly fulfill the call of God in your life. This week's challenge: identify the one smaller compromise you have been making, the thing you have been signing that is slowly moving your other lines. You do not need a speech. You need one sentence. My hands have baptized many converts and should not be used for sinfulness. Name what your hands were made for, and refuse to use them for anything less. The next witness in this series was an archbishop, a man who walked into a dictator's headquarters carrying a pastoral letter, knowing he might not walk out. He was Archbishop of Uganda. He had been warned. He went anyway. His name was Janani Luwum. Check out this next video to discover what he carried into that meeting and what he left behind.